Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 25th of June of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And during this video we're going to discuss the NATO summit that is currently taking place on the territory of the city of Hague. And during this video we're going to discuss the situation in the area of the Special Military Operation Zone, where according to information we have, another day in a row the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians launched another offensive operation, and you would be surprised where exactly the Russians started this offensive. So let's begin, and first let's talk about the NATO summit and the most important updates that are coming from this. The Telegraph reports that NATO has significantly softened its language on Russia in a draft summit communiqué agreed in The Hague. NATO drops harsh language. Unlike past year, this year's statements avoid directly blaming Russia. For example, the 2023 Vilnius summit had declared that Russia bears full responsibility for its illegal, unjustifiable, and unprovoked war. The 2024 Washington communique blamed Russia full-scale invasion and said Ukraine's future is in NATO. The phrases are gone. The new statement is less than 10% the length of the last year's version. So we see that the European countries, the NATO countries, and first of all the United States of America are trying to find a solution how to probably restore relations with the Russian Federation and how to end the conflict along the line of combat contact. Another interesting statement: 5 NATO countries are ready to mine areas along their borders with Russia to create a new Iron Curtain. I believe that it's better to call NATO curtain in Europe for the Russian Federation. According to the Daily Telegraph, we are talking about the Baltics, Poland, and Finland. So according to this article and according to these statements, the NATO countries are planning to create this buffer zone with the purpose to mine this area with a significant number of mines. And obviously we understand why exactly the European countries, the NATO countries, are going to do this, because most likely the NATO countries believes and they see that Ukraine is about to collapse completely. And if they collapse, obviously the Russian influence border will move further in the western direction and will lay along the NATO countries like Poland, the Baltic states, and the state of Finland. So that is why, and we see that the Europeans and Europe itself is not ready for probably the prolongation of this war on the territory of the European Union. So that is why it's time to start implementation of the Plan B. And the Plan B means collapse of Ukraine and the beginning of reinforcing of their own territories. Another important thing is that today we have meeting between the President of the United States of America and the President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. You know that today probably 100 episodes were published of the previous 24 hours when different journalists asked Trump about the same question. Whether you're going to meet Zelensky or not, whether you're going to provide him missiles or not, whether you're going to continue support Ukraine or not. And obviously we can see that Donald Trump is very tired from these questions because he was forced to repeat the same answers for more than 100 times. Yes, I'm going to talk with Ukraine. Most likely we're going to talk about Ukraine. Yes, we're going to meet with Zelensky and I will help him to resolve his problems and his issues. According to information we have, this meeting took place today. It lasted less than 1 hour, probably the shortest meeting ever. And according to information we have, Trump was just listening to Zelensky. What was he saying to him? Furthermore, we believe that Zelensky, first of all, was asking Trump to start selling Ukraine weapons for money. Because if you remember, since the beginning of the special military operation, the United States of America provided a lot of help to Ukraine for free, most likely for free. And now Zelensky is trying to find a way how to force or to ask or to negotiate or to agree with Trump to buy the same weapon, but this time for money. So we see that Zelensky most likely is still not ready for talks, for negotiation process. The only thing which is also very important, that before the NATO summit, Zelensky made 2 very important steps. First one is that Zelensky during the previous days, we're talking a lot about his legitimacy and about his presidential term. If you remember, just yesterday he was interviewed, several days ago most likely, he was interviewed by the Sky News, and during that interview he talked a lot about his legitimacy, about the president term, and about the future of Ukraine, and about when exactly his president term is going to be finished. And if you remember, according to his statements, he is planning to let's say to finish his president term only after the end of the war, so which is obviously can happen not very soon. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that Zelensky, this is exactly the moment, Zelensky told Sky News that he should remain the head of the country until the war is over. So, and obviously nobody knows when this war is going to over. And another important thing, that before the NATO summit, Zelensky launched his Sumy counter-offensive operation with the purpose to get as many as possible strong cards. So now we see that to start talks with Trump, Zelensky had at least two strong cards. The first one is his movements towards the president elections and the re-elections on the territory of Ukraine, and the counter-offensive operation that allowed the Ukrainians, at least for a very small period of time, to restore control over some territories that Ukraine lost during the first wave of Russian attack. So now let's discuss this in details. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction. Once again, during the previous days, the Ukrainians launched their own offensive operation in this area with the purpose to restore control over the settlements like Andriivka, Alexeyevka, Mala Takmachka, and by the end of the 22nd of June of 2025, the Ukrainians managed to restore complete control over the village of Andriivka. And of course, that was something unexpected for the Russians. The Russians began their regrouping, they began introducing additional forces in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation. We start receiving lots of videos how during the 22nd of June the Russians tried to destroy as many as possible vehicles that Ukrainians used to enter the settlement, and by the 23rd of June of 2025 the Russians launched their first offensive operation. It's very difficult to say how exactly this wave of offensive operation ended, but one thing we know for sure, that the Russians were using lots of infantry, lots of vehicles, and the Russians were trying to attack the settlement of Andriivka from many directions. Ukrainians used lots of drones, they introduced additional FPV drone operators, and most likely the Russians suffered losses. So, and by the end of the 25th of June of 2025, we know for sure that the Russians most likely managed to stabilize the situation, to bring additional forces, and to secure the northeastern part of the settlement. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking and hunting those Russians who answered the village, who were storming the village of Andriivka from many directions. So based on this video, we adjusted the northeastern part of Andriivka back in Russian favor. So we believe that the Russians are going to continue, and they will try to restore control over the settlement of Andriivka during the next several days. Most likely they will not be able to do this by the end of the NATO summit, but most likely several days outside, and we will see complete control over the settlement once again by the Russians. So when talking about this area, this is not the only place where the Ukrainians counterattacked before the NATO summit. Another counteroffensive took place to the east of the settlement of Yunakivka. And as a result of this counterattack, according to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over this forest. So they recaptured positions they lost during the first days of Russian offensive. But telling the truth, we just, let's say, restored the contested area that several weeks ago were colored in Russian favor, according to reliable mappers, without any proofs and without any geolocations. But despite these counterattacks, we understand that the most important battle currently is taking place for the village of Yunakivka. This is the heart of the first defense layer, and if the Russians are able to establish complete control with the village, Ukrainians have no chances to restore control over the first defense belt, and the battle for the second defense layer will start. And when talking about this village, we got probably the most important video from this area during the previous 24 hours. We are talking about exactly this moment, and in this moment, exactly in this moment, we can see how the Ukrainians destroyed this bridge. We are not saying that this is, let's say, the edge position of the armored force of the Russian Federation that was bombed by the Ukrainians and destroyed. We believe that right in this video, we can see how Ukrainians destroyed the bridges with the purpose not to allow these bridges villages to be taken by the Russians. So this is the only explanation I see right now. So we are not going to adjust the map right now because we don't see Russian troops in this area. One thing we know that is the most important logistic bridge in this area was destroyed, the biggest bridge in the village of Yunakivka, which means that Ukrainians most likely abandoned their positions in the northeastern part towards the southwestern part with the purpose to stick as close as possible to the main evacuation roads. So the destruction of this main arteria, of this main bridge in the central part of Yunakivka by the Ukrainian forces means just one thing. The Ukrainians are about to abandon the village of Yunakivka, and most likely this is going to happen a few days after the end of the NATO summit. And then the Russians will establish complete control over the first defense layer of the Sumy direction, and the battle for the second defense layer will begin. Now let's talk about the most unexpected development of the situation. We're going to talk about the Kharkiv area, more precisely about the Volchansk direction. During the previous days, the group of forces north made a lot of statements about the progress on the ground, that almost every single day we can see in their Telegram official channel that they secured another building, they captured another building, they forced the Ukrainians to fall back from another, let's say, territory or construction or facility, but nobody published any updates about any progress on the ground. And today we got a very interesting video published by the Russian sources. We're talking about this video, and here we can see how Ukrainians along this river were trying to create fortifications and strongholds. So we see Ukrainians are trying to build positions below the bridge. This is a fresh video, by the way, was made probably several days ago, but just today was published. Maybe this video was made in the morning, who knows. But the most and the key moment is that Ukrainians were trying to reinforce their positions along this river, along this bridge, with the purpose probably not to allow the Russians to begin their offensive operation. And right before we started making this video, the Ukrainian sources published another video, and according to a fresh video that we haven't added to map because it was published just a moment ago, the Ukrainians were attacking Russians exactly in this point. Ukrainians using FPV drones were attacking Russian troopers exactly in this area. So according to this video that we are going to discuss during the next update in the morning on the 26th of June of 2025, the Russians crossed the river of Vovchi exactly in this area, landed behind Ukraine positions in the vicinity of this bridge and captured them. So this video can mean several things. First of all, the Russians attack Ukrainians with the purpose not to allow them to build fortifications along the river of Volcha and below that bridge, below the bridge that we saw a minute ago, or the Russians crossed this area, captured positions that were created by the Ukrainians, and now the Russians are going to continue offensive operation further in the western part of the city of Volchansk with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory. So something tells me that the Russians began another offensive operation, but this time on the southern part of the city of Volchansk. So anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but the next days can be very hot and very interesting in the Volchansk direction, and the Russians may try to establish complete control over the city of Volchansk and to continue offensive operation further in the southern and the southeastern direction with the purpose to meet with the Russian ground forces that are attacking the city of Kupiansk itself. As for the city of Kupiansk, according to different sources, the Russians during the previous 24 hours secured the village of Golubovka, which is located between the villages of Mirova, Ryadkovka, Kondrashevka and the river Voskol. As for now, without any proofs, but maybe the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information in the very near future. As of now, we have no proofs about additional progress on the ground when talking about geolocations. In the Liman direction, the Ukrainians counterattacked the Russians in the area of the village of Karpovka and Redkadub. The Ukrainians counterattacked Russians with the purpose to force them to fall back from the Ukrainian side of the river of Nitrius, and Ukrainians attacked the village of Redkadub with the purpose to answer the northwestern part of the settlement. So as you can see, the Ukrainians did this situation also before the beginning of the NATO summit, and the most important purpose of this counterattack of Ukrainians was to stop the Russian offensive operation Federation in the direction of the settlements of Glushenkova and the settlement of Novomir. Now the Russians, due to the fact that Ukrainians managed to enter Itkadub, are forced to stop both offensives. They are forced to bring their forces back in the direction of the village with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory. So it's just another maneuver carried out by the Ukrainians with the purpose to slow down the Russian offensive in the direction of the city of Barova. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Kramatorsk. During the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving updates of how the Russians were using ground drones in their attacks on Ukrainian positions. In this video, we can see another ground drone, but this time this ground drone was equipped with camera, and using this camera, the Russians, the operator, had possibilities to navigate and to control the flight of this drone. And as a result of this attack, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Russians destroyed some sites, military site, where the Ukrainians were building and were constructing drones to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation or in the Bakhmut-Gorlovka area. So this is another video how the Russians attacked this territory with drones, and this is very interesting because the Russians now have possibilities to attack the territory of Ukraine with drones, not just deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, but also along the line of combat contact. And another interesting thing that I would like to point to your attention today and yesterday and today, the Russians used not so many drones. For example, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians used 71 drones, and that's it. For example, on the 24th of June of 2025, we got probably the same numbers, just 97 drones. So a very, very small number of drones the Russians use these days. Let's take a look at the number of drones that the Russians used on the 23rd. Yes, the last time when the Russians used several hundreds of drones took place on the during the nights between the 22nd and 23rd of June of 2025. This is very important, and the main value of this is that the Russians currently have possibilities to produce up to 400 or even 500 drones a day. The source reported that the Russians in the very near future are going to build 700 drones per day, and we're talking about September of 2025. So it's just simple mathematics. If the Russians, yes, they used 90 drones, today they used just 70 drones, which means that in total they used 160 drones of 800 drones that they managed to produce for the same period of time. It seems that the Russians are preparing themselves before the beginning of another massive drone strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine that will last for 3, 4, 5 days. They're going to use every day up to 4 or 5 or 600 drones with the purpose to completely suppress and to destroy Ukraine air defense. Of course, they will support these attacks with missiles, and most likely this is going to be the beginning, something like preparation before the beginning of another major offensive operation. Because almost and approximately the same period of time, the Russians are going to finish the battle or to, let's say, to break the situation to the south of the city of Konstantinovka and in the area of Chasov Yar. The Russians maybe launched offensive operation in the area of Volchansk. So this massive missile drone strike could be very helpful and useful for the Russians, for the Russian troops and Russian forces on the ground. So we are going to face a huge escalation after the end of the NATO summit. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not today, but obviously during the next 2 or 3 days. So when talking about Konstantinovka, there are still very heavy clashes for the southern part of Kliban-Byk, but several pro-Russian resources reported that by the end of the 25th of June of 2025, the Russians almost completely secured the village of Alexandra Kalinova and entered the southeastern part of the village of Yablunovka. So as you can see now, the Russians are advancing in this area from the west in the eastern direction and from the southeast in the northwestern direction, trying to take, and not just trying, but by taking the village of Yablunovka completely in pincers and cauldron. So most likely after the Russians finish with this area, they will get additional forces to finish the battle for the pocket and for the cauldron that was created by the Russians to the south of the Kliban-Byksky water reservoir. As for now, there are lots of videos and geolocations how the Russians continue patrolling around this area, trying to find and to hunt and to seek another position of damage armed forces of Ukraine and to destroy it if they see that this target begin movement. So the situation remains tense for the Ukrainians without any changes in upcoming future. At the same time, the Russians intensify their artillery strikes, drone strikes, artillery strikes, and aviation strikes to the northwest of the N32 road. It seems that the Russians are planning to begin offensive operation in this area as well, with the purpose to break through Ukrainian defense and to get the next defense layer that lays along the main supply line between Novo Ekonomichne and the settlement of Drushkovka. So something tells me that obviously the Russians will try to take under control these territories, because if this territory can be taken by the Russians, is being taken by the Russians, this can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian Donbas arc defense. Now let's talk about the Dnipropetrovsk direction. The Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Yalta. It took just 5 days for the Russians to finish the battle for this territory, and as we can see, the Russians, at least in this direction, are moving faster and faster and faster. And now we see that Ukrainians don't have enough of time to prepare another defense belt before the Russians are able to get there. So the village of Yalta was taken just for 5 days, and this is a new record in the area of the responsibilities of the Group of Forces East. But something tells me that due to this critical situation of the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction, the village of Zirka would be taken even faster, maybe during 3 or 4 days. The Russians continue offensive. The Russians raised 5 or 6 flags all over the entire territory of the settlement, so we have no doubts that the village was captured by the Russians. But when talking about this area, I was astonished by the article that was published by the pro-Ukrainian mappers Deep State, and according to them, by the end of the 25th of June of 2025, the Russians just finished the battle for this line. So the Russians just approached and reached the western part of Andreevka, secured the village of Constantinople, and the Russians improved their positions in the southern part of Bogatyr. So it's very, very interesting gap between the information that we can find in the open source and updates that were published by the pro-Ukraine mappers, and I have a question: why we see such a big gap? Either the Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation, at least in the let's say in the internet, or maybe the situation that you can see right now in front of your screens is a bit not the situation and has nothing in common with the situation in the reality. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but it's very interesting why we have this gap. And as for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue their battle for the village of Shevchenka, and according to different sources, first of all, according to pro-Ukraine mappers, the Russians controlled by the end of the 25th of June of 2025 around 90% of the settlements. So most likely tomorrow, this village would be colored in Russian favor completely. So the Russians launched their offensive operation in this area several days ago. The assault operation started somewhere on the 19th of June. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 19th of June or 20th of June of 2025. When the Russians began their offensive, by the end of the 21st of June, the Russians secured the southern part. Then the Russians finished this battle for the southern part completely by the end of the 23rd of June. By the end of the 24th of June, the Russians improved their positions in the northeastern part. And by the end of the 25th of June, the Russians secured almost the entire village of Shevchenka, which also opens the operational space to move further in the northwestern direction. And another important thing that, as a result of talks between the President of Ukraine and the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, Zelensky stated that he is ready for peace, for good and favorable peace for Ukraine. It doesn't mean anything. It means just Zelensky most likely is going to, maybe not to surrender, but to be more flexible probably when talking about demands of the Russian Federation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.